Ladies and gentlemen, up next, an interview with co-host of the Circus on Showtime, Jennifer Palmieri, and former acting director of National Intelligence, Ric Grenell.
You have a little cheering section.
I think it's more than little, right? Come on.
Seems like a lot of enthusiasm over on that side of the room for you. So it was kind when they announced me that they said I was co-host of Showtime's Circus.
I noticed that.
Yes, which I am, and proud to be. I have a lot of my colleagues from the Circus are here. I'm also, because just to share with everyone, I was also Hillary Clinton's communications director in 2016.
Hey.
I mean, I thought, well, we'll get to that. And Barack Obama, White House communications director for Barack Obama too. So I'm just gonna do the whole thing.
I asked her to do this.
Bill Clinton, I worked for Bill Clinton as well. Just yeah. Oh, I thought he might do better. Okay. But the theme of this discussion is you don't learn a lot only talking to people you agree with, right? Thank you. And so Rick and I have a good mutual friend, and he said, wouldn't it be interesting if you and I had a conversation from different sides of the aisle and showed that you can I don't even really think debate is necessarily productive these days so much as what's interesting for me and interviewing Republicans, particularly on the Circus, is just to understand, we may not agree on things, but I want to know where your beliefs are coming from, what's underneath it all, right? And I think that is the beginning of a way to start to understand each other.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Thank you. Thanks for asking me. Thanks. So you worked for 8 years for President George W. Bush. You were the spokesperson for the U.S. at the United Nations. So I don't know if you would call yourself at that time part of sort of the neocon, but you were part of certainly the foreign policy establishment in Republican circles. And so I had an awareness of you, right? And then on the Clinton campaign, and during the primaries in 2016, you've been critical of President Trump, like during the primaries. And I remember the Clinton campaign, when we heard that you had joined the Trump campaign, thinking like, wow, Ric Grenell, he was he's just like foreign policy establishment for the Republicans. What was that about for you, making that jump to
So
Trump?
what I would say is I was never a part of the foreign policy establishment, even though I might have had a job.
You had a job in the establishment.
Well, here's the thing is I've worked at the State Department for 12 years. I had worked at the State Department. I've always been the guy that thinks that the President of the United States needs to have a strong Pentagon and a strong State Department. So I joined the State Department. I've been the guy that's been pushing for diplomacy, pushing for alternatives to war. I was up at the UN, and I think that during those days, we did a really good job of galvanizing the world to come together for the beginnings of the Iraq War. I think the problem that we saw is that there was faulty intelligence. And the more I worked in government, the more I realized that government really makes mistakes, and there's a whole group of people that won't admit that government makes mistakes. And so if you go back and you see the faulty intelligence of the Iraq War, we should have admitted it a long time ago. We should have said we built this Iraq War on faulty intelligence. And that, to me, the lack of the foreign policy establishment admitting that really was a problem. When I was acting DNI, we had the foreign policy establishment and the intelligence community say if you moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, you would create World War III. Not only were they wrong about that intelligence, but actually Donald Trump created peace by having the Abraham Accords, the peace accords. And that's literally the opposite. Think about that.
Right.
It's literally the opposite of what the intelligence community told us.
The intelligence prior to the war in Ukraine said that that Russia would overrun.
So that's a great point. And so this is what I would say is for 1 month straight, the intelligence from Joe Biden said there is a war in Ukraine coming. The Russians are coming into Ukraine.
Well, that was right.
For 1 month. It was totally right.
Yeah.
Here's my problem. We didn't do anything to stop it.
Well, that's
We literally, no. Anthony Blinken never went to Kiev. He has his own plane, Jen. He can get on his own plane and he could fly to any capital in Europe and try to do some sort of a peace accord. What my problem was is that he absolutely told us 100% sure the Russians are coming, and his only policy was to tell Zelensky, we'll give you a ride out and get out of the way of the Russians.
I mean, that's not true. I mean, they did participate in efforts with the French on the front end, but
No, there was no.
But the Russians were wrong about what the United States' reaction was going to be and what the West's reaction was going to be.
Look, the Russians
the intelligence on their side was not right either.
Yeah, the Russians, I think, we always have to be skeptical of the Russians. There's no question about that. And look, I would say this. What the Senate Democrats don't like to admit is that they came in and they valued consensus with the Europeans, right? So I stood up to Merkel constantly saying, you shouldn't have this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's a bad idea. And what they said back to me was, you don't understand, we can have the pipeline and be okay with the Russians. We in the Trump administration put sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Senate Democrats dropped those sanctions as soon as they came in order to please Merkel. And then, to me, that was a huge signal to Putin that he should go back to what he did in the Obama days of grabbing Crimea when Obama and Merkel looked the other way. And he started back in with a war in Ukraine. I believe that Senate Democrats encouraged this behavior.
But Putin was wrong about how the U.S. was going to respond and how the West was going to respond. I mean, in the end, it's not what happened, right? In the end.
But in the end, I think we have to be able to admit that why didn't Putin invade under Trump?
Yeah, that I don't know. I have a theory.
What's your theory?
I have a theory that President Putin supported President Trump and didn't want to do anything that would. I've been waiting for the booze.
So here's what I'll. No. Let's talk about. Let's do this with facts.
And I didn't want to do anything that would endanger President Trump's presidency.
Let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation.
That's what I think.
Look, hey, we can't hear you anyway, so hang on.
Okay.
I can handle this.
Okay. Don't worry, everyone. You're in good hands with Rick. That's just what I think.
No, I want you to say that again. I want to give you time to have that theory.
Oh boy. Okay. I said I think that President Putin supported President Trump would not want to have endangered his presidency.
Didn't want to endanger the presidency. Okay. So here is.
And I don't know what President Putin thought about what the U.S.'s reaction was going to be this time. He might have thought, but he was wrong.
Right.
What should we do with it now?
So this is what I would say to that, is that I believe that the evidence was clear that we in the Trump administration were very tough on Russia. What we had was, with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, we saw the intelligence that it was coming close to coming up, and we didn't want it to come up. We didn't want that to be operational. And so our sanctions on that pipeline, I wish people would realize, were the right thing to do. And so when you dropped the sanctions on that, I think then you have to take the mantle of being weak on Russia, because you're the ones who dropped those sanctions.
Okay.
Senate Democrats.
Senate Democrats, not me. Okay.
Not you.
But it's not where we've ended up, is it? Right? The U.S. is not weak on Russia across the board.
Yeah,
but what do you think about? You told me if I go off on a tangent, stop me, and so now Nord Stream is starting to become a tangent. So, what about Ukraine now? Here, some speakers have stood on the stage and said things in support of U.S. involvement with Ukraine. A lot of speakers have stood on the stage and said that they think that the U.S. is too involved, that we should stop funding efforts there.
Here's my
Senate
position.
Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who I think is still a Republican, he said it was the most important thing. The most important thing in the world today is just for Ukraine to stop Russia, and there needs to be bipartisan. What do you think?
So here's my position: is that the President of the United States needs all the tools of the U.S. government. So I'm all for having a very strong military. I want to make sure we're always prepared. But as a diplomat, when I'm sitting across the table and trying to do a peace agreement, it's incredibly important that there's a Pentagon behind me, right, that says if we fail, I got to transfer this over to the Pentagon, and they don't negotiate. And so I am very critical of Anthony Blinken. And I don't believe that Joe Biden thinks that he's a very good Secretary of State, because Joe Biden has never allowed him to come forward with a peace plan. We have the Chinese.
They think it's too soon. I mean, the Biden.
Too soon.
There's
It's been
an
a
answer
year.
for that. The Biden team says that. I mean, I know China came forward with
A decent one. It's a good one to start with.
Well,
it's
the
not
Biden-
perfect.
So the Biden administration thinks that it was so laughably bad from the Ukrainians' perspective as to be a ruse.
But Zelensky said Biden was wrong. Zelensky said, wow, the Chinese believe in territorial integrity for Ukraine? That's more than Merkel and Obama.
But he has his own interests, right? So but what do you
But he
think?
immediately
at any rate, but what
complimented and wanted to do it.
What do you think you would go to the negotiating table?
I would have gone a year ago to the negotiating table.
And to lift up, that's very different. I mean, do you?
But to try, Jen. You got to try. Do you
Is
know
that
that
a
Tony
position
Blinken?
Is that a year ago you would have been doing that from a position of weakness?
No way. No way. I think a year ago, when you have intelligence saying the Russians are coming, there's a war coming, it's immoral to not offer a peace plan.
But I'm now interested in taking this to a higher level, right, about U.S. role in the world, okay? Because that is, what you're deciding is, it is, not worth, at this point, it is more, the most important thing is to get to an agreement and this.
Safety of human life. So this is
but it does go to, I think, a larger question about what do you see as the U.S. role in the world? It's like during the Bush administration, it was, it was an objective to spread democracy in the world.
Yeah, export, right.
Yeah.
So what I would say,
and do you think that, or is it, what do you see as the U.S. role in the world? Because I think that does, and Ukraine's an example of that. But what's interesting for me to hear is after spending your whole career in this,
yeah.
how do you look at
I
that?
reject the idea that somehow you're either pro-war or weak.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you have to have a strong Pentagon, and you have to have diplomats who are tough.
Right.
We've seen too many times Democrats mock tough diplomats from the Republican side. They want the State Department to be, about wine and cheese. They don't want tough diplomats. They just did culinary diplomacy. So here's what I would say.
So you enjoy a good meal? I feel like that could be helpful.
When Anthony Blinken says that all good negotiations start with food,
okay.
I would say no, they start with a really good, strong pro-America policy and a messenger that knows how to drive it home.
Beating up on poor Tony a lot. What do you think about that bigger question? Like what the U.S. role, I am very interested in this.
So I think that we can articulate, as people who want to put America first, at least I can.
Yeah,
I can
what does that mean?
articulate when you put America first, you tell the world that capitalism is a good thing, you respect human rights, you always come down on the rule of law, and to have a superpower like America that puts itself first, we have to be unabashedly telling the world, you will benefit when America puts itself first because we have a rules-based system.
And how do you think that differs from what President Biden is doing?
I think the opposite of America first is consensus with the Europeans.
With our friends when we can, on our own when we must. That's what they
Well,
say.
you said, what does that mean for the world? And what I would say is when you don't put America first, then when Chancellor Merkel comes to you and says, drop the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2
Oh my
pipeline,
God, back to the Nord Stream pipeline,
you do that. And I think that you should have kept the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. You wouldn't have had the war in Ukraine. That's putting America first. But the Europeans and Merkel came and begged and said, do you want to have nicer relations with us? drop the sanctions.
And what do you think is more important, for the U.S. should the U.S. be promoting democracy, or should the U.S., is that a goal?
I think we absolutely stand for democracy, and we support it wherever we find it, but I think exporting this on people who are not ready or not willing can be a waste.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but when you look back at your career, and I think that, I mean, I know enough about you, and I am old enough to remember when you were a young aide and when the Republicans took over the Congress for the first time in many years in 1995. Like, you've been at this for a long time. I was working for President Clinton at the time. I mean, I remember you from that time. Do you feel like there were times, are you like, we were operating on the wrong principles before? Have you always been sort of a provocateur, never part of the establishment? Or and therefore your views have changed? Or is this just an evolution for you of like what's needed for America now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And what I would say is the more you work inside government, the more you see that it's not perfect, and we need to be honest about that.
Yeah.
If we're gonna be a great country, we have to be transparent about our failures. We are a great country because we constantly try to improve, and I would say that the weaponization of government right now is a huge problem.
Yeah, I see it. I agree with that statement. I see the weaponization happening in a different way, but.
Yeah.
But I feel like we had a good discussion, right, people? Okay.
Thank you again for doing
Yeah, I was very happy to do this, and I would be remiss as a Democrat on stage, just say a couple of. Thinking of a couple of people who are going through some hard times right now, President Carter and his family, Senator John Fetterman and his family. I know that your mom is, Ric's mother is battling cancer too. And just want to say we're thinking of I'm thinking of all of them.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Where do we go out?